The All Black podcast is powered by our official cloud software partner, SAP, helping our teams in black become the best run teams in sport. To listen to this episode and all the All Black podcasts, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere you get your podcasts.
Kia ora whānau, welcome to the All Black podcast powered by SAP. New Zealander Joe Schmidt has taken over the reins of the Wallaby rugby side, the third New Zealander to be the head coach of the Australian team. So I thought we'd take a trip down memory lane to the very first time this happened, all the way back in 2008, when today's guest was just 27 years old, I think, and a man that he'd been coached by at the Crusaders, Robbie Deans, became the first Kiwi to coach the Aussies. Welcome to the pod, Richie McCaw. How you going, mate?
Very good, thanks. Yeah. Jeez, it seems a wee while ago now, 2008.
It does. Every time I chat to you, mate, these memories are just that little bit further away, but I'll ask to see, look, what you can dig up. Like firstly, mate, what's going on? It's always good to have a chat first. Like, is it, have we, got some big events on the horizon? Are we just an Uber service for the girls? Like, what's taking up the majority of your time?
Oh, yeah, 3 young kids keeps things fairly busy. Not quite at the stage where, sport's taken over yet, but that'll be coming, I'm sure. But yeah, no, I got a few things keeping us busy, and yeah, in terms of events, nothing too major on the horizon. Going to do the coast to coast next year again. That's in the plan. So just keep things ticking over during the winter months to make sure I turn up in reasonable shape then.
Yeah, I've no doubt that you're doing all of that. And you're saying the girls are they starting to get into a little bit of sport? Is it a hockey stick, or is it a bit of cross country, or like is there a little bit of organised sport starting to get on the radar for some of the girls?
Yeah, my oldest is 5.5, and she's started sort of Saturday morning hockey, which is
what do you got to offer there, Rich?
Well, zero. I don't offer anything. But Jen would probably say that she chose it, that the girls chose it, but I guess there was encouragement that way, but all their friends were playing it, so it was really cool. It's great to watch them get out and about and run around. So it's the start of that side of things with the young kids.
And what are we seeing? Any characteristics from mum and dad? Is she got a big motor, or is she all aggression? Like is a back chat, or what's any traits coming through?
Nah, not that I can notice. Like, just looked like all the other kids out there running around. There was nothing that you'd pick out there's anything different. But I think the big thing that you realise, as long as they've got a smile on their face and out there with their friends, that's what it's all about. And until you actually see that, you sort of, it sort of reinforces what you kind of know in the back of your mind, that how good sport is for camaraderie, getting out, getting fresh air, getting some exercise, all those sort of things, and learning to be, learning something along the way. That's what it's all about, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I love asking people like yourself this sort of question, particularly as the Olympics have just been. But like, did you watch a bit of it? Like, and were there some events in particular you enjoyed or took in or admired the athletes and how they went about their business?
I really enjoy a lot of all the sports that you can watch. But I guess from a New Zealand perspective, try to catch as much as I could. Like the rowing and the kayaking, pretty amazing. Those guys and girls, what they achieved. I think one of the things I had a wee bit to do with some guys in the rowing. Like if you want to know what training tough, being tough and training hard is, go and see what those guys do. Like, man, they know how to empty the tank, and it's impressive to watch. And the other side of the Olympics that I really always intrigues me is a lot of athletes go there that are potentially won world championships or are the best, set world records, but they don't always deliver it on that day when it counts. And seeing pressure, what it does to different people, that's the bit that intrigues me. I think when I was playing the latter years, you realise that often it come down to handling those moments that determine whether you're successful or not, and seeing the people that do, and then the ones that don't. I enjoy that side of it, and that's why I just you got to just admire Alicia Carrington to be able to do it time and time again, and have the desire and the drive to just keep wanting to get better, and obviously doing it part of a team, not just individually. That's hugely impressive, and to see that was amazing.
Yeah, it was. She's an absolute champion, isn't she? Look, let's look back at 2008, and it's crazy to think, like, these days, Kiwis not just coaching other teams, but maybe even coaching some of our biggest rivals. If we look at today's game with Tony Brown over at South Africa, and we've now had 3 coaches who have coached the Wallaby side. But back then, it was a new thing, with Robbie going over and coaching the Wallabies in 2008. But actually, to sort of create a bit of context around that, you were still actually a relatively young captain at the time, 27 years old, had been in the job a few years. Like, I'd had a setback in 2007. Like, where were you at in terms of starting that 2008 year? Can you remember the challenges you set yourself, or how you went about it? Were you talked a lot about it in your later career, the work you did with people like Gilbert and Carey. Was that a big part of what you were doing then?
Yeah, well, it came off what happened in 07. Obviously pretty disappointing, and all the things that got played out around the coaching of the All Blacks, for example, and Graham and Stephen Wayne got reappointed. Robbie had his name in the hat, missed out, and yet we obviously had him as our coach at the Crusaders. So it was all a bit of a weird time when all that stuff was being played out. I think from a personal point of view, getting over the disappointment of 07, just wanted to get back out the field and play and put that behind you. And being able to do that for the Crusaders in a slightly different environment than what we've been in was actually really refreshing. And then we had a really, really successful super season. We pretty much, I can't remember totally, but I think we might have only dropped one game up until the last week. I think we might have dropped one in the last week before the semis, but we were certainly at the top of the ladder and playing some good rugby. And but the weird thing was, obviously, what had played out, then Robbie, who was coaching us, was then going to go and coach the Wallabies, and a few weeks later we're facing the coach that we were listening to for the first half of the year. He was then plotting probably at the same time how to get one over us a couple of weeks later. So that kind of, I think people made more of it than what it was. It didn't really affect anything within the Crusaders, but certainly there was it would have been interesting, from Robbie's point of view, probably, having to have one mind on the Crusaders and one mind on what was coming up. But I think having a successful super campaign from a personal point of view sort of was able to put behind for a while, with certainly what had happened in 07. Reminded ourselves and myself that, because of what had happened didn't mean you're any worse rugby player, that you still had to do the things, but you could still foot it. And to have got to the start of the international season having had some success was pretty cool. But the other thing that and you might touch on it a wee bit was there was the ELVs had been brought in. The experimental law variations were played during the super season, which added a different dynamic. Working out how you make the best of them, which was interesting. But I thought we embraced them. We were like, rather than sort of bitch moan about what it's done to the game, go, how do we be the best at dealing with them, and whatever's changed, how do we make the most of it? So I think that was a pretty good attitude to have.
What did that look like? What was the main part of those? Well, I remember maybe a bit more kicking. Obviously, the scrum was getting replaced a bit, or scrum penalties or free kicks with a tap, wasn't it?
If I remember rightly, instead of penalising at the breakdown, it was a free kick. So it wasn't, you didn't slow it down, kick it out, have a line out. It was, so you effectively either tapped and went, or you had a scrum. And because of that, what happened is, I think we all kind of, especially in our own half, became a little bit reluctant to play too much rugby. So we did a lot more kicking. real field position became really important, and actually putting the ball in the air and making a 50-50 was
Rewarded.
probably less risky than playing with the ball when you own 40, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I think teams sort of, well, we certainly kicked a lot more than we had, but that didn't mean we scored any less tries. That sort of meant we didn't give away, or put ourselves under too much pressure, and we still took our chances. So I think we got the balance pretty well right. And teams that overplayed, when you get a free kick or whatever, you're forced to just go. So it was sort of like get them back 10 metres, tap, and just keep going. So sort of had it like that, which, in some ways it was actually made the game a lot more dynamic, but in other ways it changed your sort of risk appetite for having breakdowns and whatnot.
It actually, in 2008, it wasn't that long ago you had wrestled back the Bledisloe Cup, and I probably, we're of the same vintage, so you had spent, a lot of your youth, watching us, potentially lose some Bledisloe Cup games. We didn't always hold the Bledisloe Cup, so it was probably at that time, and I'm sure it still is today, of course, is a cup that was very precious to you and something you put a huge amount of focus on going into that season with a little bit more on it with Robbie over coaching, the Wallabies.
Yeah, like in the late 90s, I think from 98 through to 2000, and we got it back in 2003. We didn't have the Bledisloe, so my first couple of years out of school, when I was sort of close to, starting to be in the professional ranks, the All Blacks, we always came up short. There was Kifu scoring a try at the end. I think my first 2002 season, Bert kicked a penalty at the end to win the second game. And, there was a fair bit of heartbreak that way. And there was still a few of us that had won it back in 2003 in the team at that time. So sort of understood what it takes to get it back and didn't want to have to go through that again. Those messages were always reinforced. It was, I don't think it's diminished, but there's certainly some of us that knew what it was like not to have it, and that kept the fire burning to, not wanting to give it back very easily at all.
Test rugby is pretty brutal, and you sort of out of the cauldron and into the fire in terms of 2007 into 2008. You started the season, and you actually lost a couple of test matches before, before playing the game in Eden Park, which we're going to touch on a little bit more. But what do you remember of that time? I know, obviously, you were skip of the side. You were injured for the first match against Australia. What can you remember of the season as the international season as you got into it?
Well, for some reason, we played the final on the Saturday night of the Super Rugby, and the following Saturday we played Ireland in a test match. So we'd won the Super Rugby, the Crusaders had, and we'd had a night of celebrating. And then lunchtime the next day, we were on a plane to Wellington, and I was straight into, I remember having a senior player meeting that afternoon about how we were going to organise the week to play Ireland. And so it was a pretty quick switch, but always the way when you come into a start of a test season, you have a bunch of guys that, like us, that had the joy of winning, and then you had a whole lot of guys that just couldn't wait to get going on the into the test rugby because the Super hadn't been quite as enjoyable. So it was a pretty quick turnaround, and then we played them. Then we had a couple of tests against England, and in that second test, I'd hurt my ankle, and so missed the first two rounds of Super Rugby of the Tri Nations, which it was called back then. We lost to South Africa in Dunedin. It's the first time I'd lost at home since I think maybe 2003, and then went to Sydney, and I was close to playing the game against Sydney. I was named to play, and I think during the week I tweaked my ankle again, and so I had to pull out. But we went over there, hurting a bit from the loss, obviously, to South Africa, but thinking, we will sort that out. But the loss to Aussie over there in Sydney was pretty comprehensive. Like, we really didn't really look like we were in the game. And we mentioned the ELVs before. We were playing under the same rules for the Tri Nations, and I think this is where we'll probably touch on obviously there's a fair bit of talk in the media with Graham Henry versus Robbie Deans. Obviously, they'd gone for the All Black job. Graham had got it, Robbie missed out, and then all of a sudden they're up against each other test matches. But certainly Robbie's experience with the Crusaders about how we get the best out of the ELVs, he took that straight to the Aussies, and I'm not sure we adapted quite as quickly in the All Blacks. And they were just smarter than us that night and blew us off the paddock, really. So yeah, it was a pretty tough start to the Tri Nations.
And how sort of, I know it's really difficult, but to paint a picture, but you had lost to South Africa, you had lost the first test to Australia on Australia, and like you say, there was a lot of media coverage and build up to that with being the first time Robbie and Ted had coached against each other since both going for the same job, and you're the skipper as well. So with the potential of the All Blacks losing 3 test matches on the bounce, that's got to sharpen the focus for the skipper and the team. Surely, it's probably a hard one to describe, but what did you feel going into that test match? I suppose the first thing was that at least you're putting the boots on again.
Yeah, well, I was hoping I was going to. Like, I obviously thought I was going to the week before, and then had to pull out. But I think when the team lost, not that I thought I was going to make too much of a difference, but I was just pretty determined to go. If there's any chance of getting out and playing, I would. And luckily, Amazing a week had sort of got that sorted enough to start the week, pretty confident I could play. But yeah, we flew back on the Sunday. It was the pressure was on. If we lost that, we'd have lost the Bledisloe. And then, you think about all the people that have made the decision to appoint Graham Henry back after what happened in 07 to, there was a bit of feeling around the country as to whether that was a right or wrong decision. And then we'd been, knocked over convincingly that week. People from the board and everyone, the pressure was on, and we could all sense it. And you just realised, that if we didn't get that job done, I'm not sure, what would have happened. I'm not, maybe nothing untoward, but certainly you could see people were feeling it. And I think as a team, we understood it. But put aside all that peripheral stuff, we were just gutted at the way we'd played, and the fact you'd just sort of been outplayed like that, and we're pretty determined to turn it around. But I think a lot of things that we had to learn some lessons that perhaps we were a bit slow on, what happened during Super Rugby and what the Aussies had done to us the week before. And kicking was a big part of it, as I mentioned earlier, about, kicking at the right time. There was a bit more kicking involved. Just get that balance right. And we just had to physically get that at the start of the game get sorted. And yeah, it put a bit of edge on. But I think from my point of view, having not been involved the week before, good or bad, I don't know, I just sort of was that determined just to get out in the field to do my bit to help. I was just grateful to be able to get that chance. It would have been hard to have watched again, if you were almost right like I was the week before. So, yeah.
Back to the Garden of Eden, and at that time, I think it had been 28 games on the trot that you'd won there at Eden Park. Like, was it a thing for you? Like, did you feel a confidence going back to that ground, a place where you'd had a lot of success? I don't think we'd lost a game there since 1994. Obviously, that run has now extended to where we are today. But was that even something that perhaps gave the team a little bit more confidence, or that was a mere byproduct of trying to get the job done?
Oh, I don't think that was talked about too much, but there's no doubt playing at Eden Park, it's a great place to play as an All Black. Always has been, and I think even with what's happened since while I was around, but also since we've finished, it's carried on. It is a great place to play, but if I'll be honest, it wouldn't have mattered if we were playing that week. I think the attitude would have been the same. We needed to, get out there and put a performance together. But it was, as I say, you lose a test match and you don't get the chance again. Whereas we're lucky, we straight away 7 days later you got to get straight back in and have another crack. And that's the thing you're probably grateful for around that, is you get a chance to ride it, turn it around, which I could tell from the first, 5 minutes, the guys were at a different level, like of intensity, and there's no doubt the Wallabies had played a hell of a game the week before, and the tough thing's backing that up week after week, and maybe they weren't quite at the same level they were at. We were at a level higher than we were the week before, and I think the scores were reversed. They put it was 30, maybe 30 to something, to not much, and then I think it was about the complete opposite. 7 days later, which is shows you that margins are quite small in international rugby.
Totally turning I think it was a 36-19 defeat into a 39-10 win. I want to ask you a couple of things around, you've been, fortunate enough, particularly when we talk about Bledisloe Cup matches, to mark some really good players, like Phil Waugh, George Smith, David Pocock, etc. I think that day it was George Smith, who actually someone who was a completely different seven to say a David Pocock. Like, again, did that affect your preparation? Did you scout and look at your opposition players and sevens, or actually it was very much worrying about yourself? Because I, dare I say, Richard on the All Black podcast and with you as a guest, I really enjoyed George Smith as a footballer. He's highly skilled. He used to pop up in all sorts of funny places. Part of that very strong Brumbies team that took, a number of times a bit of heartbreak for the Crusaders in the early years. Like, did you, was that something you paid a lot of attention to, the man in the opposite jumper?
Yeah, well, you got to play against them fairly regularly, and absolutely understood what you're up against. I think the things here, like a guy like a George Smith, I first played, I think it was under 19s, and I didn't know who he was, but I remember after the game, going, man, that guy knows what he's doing. And then I think it was that next year he was playing for the Brumbies, and then played against the Lions, a year later. Like he was a smart footballer. Like he knew where to be and how to have an impact fairly regularly, and you had to know, be aware of what he could do. So we had some good battles over the years, for a long time with him. But then there's Phil Waugh, who was a slightly different player, a bit more confrontational. But again, you knew what you were going to get there, and it was, you had to. If you're a little bit slow to, the first phase breakdown or whatever, they'd get in there and disrupt it. So you'd be pretty aware of that. And then the latter years, David Pocock he was the best there's been, probably still has been at being able to contest the ball on the ground. And if you gave him even just a split second to get in there, he was almost impossible to move. And we did spend a bit of time about how you limit his ability to influence those sort of things. And answer your question, certainly knew who you're up against, and had to. You didn't want to get so focused on a opposition player, because if your whole team's on top, it limits their influence like that. But there's a few little things that you had to just be aware of that they can make your team's day, a lot harder.
Do you ever do you see those guys around post your careers, catch up, surely there's a huge element of respect that you probably all made each other better because you're all trying to compete and knew that if you were off your game that, they would get the better of you and vice versa. Do you ever have those sort of conversations or come across those guys?
Yeah, I think that era through when I started through to maybe 2011, a lot of those guys of like Gregan, Larkham, George Smith, Mortlocks, there was a huge amount of respect for the way they played the game, but also the way they carried themselves off the field. They loved the game and played it the right way. And as tough as it was, that the games against the Wallabies through those years was certainly enjoyable, because both teams had a real positive. Were really positive in how they wanted to play, and there was always you come off, not necessarily the most physical games, but in terms of stretch physically, in terms of a lot of running and having to nail the opportunities that come. That was I really enjoyed those games. And you're right, now you meet up, there's always a bit of banter about those games, and but it comes through a lot of mutual respect, and there's some good friendships that I think you get to know people when you're playing, but unlike the amateur era where you spend a lot of time after games with each other. Actually, there's always next week when we were playing, so you sort of move on pretty quickly. But since we're finished, when we catch up at different things, it's pretty cool to have a bit of banter and reminisce about those good old days.
Look, mate, your thoughts on the Bledisloe Cup this year? Like we know, and we know what an excellent coach Joe Schmidt is. Everywhere he's gone, he's had an effect. I think we can absolutely say that in terms of his time with the All Blacks, his time in Ireland, his time at every provincial team he's been with. He's a great coach. And maybe Australia have a bit of a nothing to lose attitude as well. I'm not too sure. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I agree. They'll get better. They've always, like, I think, there's some good players, but they haven't always had the depth across the whole lot. And but amazing guys that you haven't heard of or seen a lot of, they often step up. And if they've got good direction and they're smart how they do it, they'll be a threat. If you go in there thinking anything but that, you get yourself in trouble. I think if the All Blacks play to their potential, I can't see the Wallabies beating them. But it's easy to say that, but you only got to be off it by a little bit, and then the Wallabies, to make a statement to get one over the All Blacks would be a big statement that they're on the improve. And Joe Schmidt will have an insight as to the bits that are where the All Blacks are vulnerable, and they can exploit that. Like, who knows? But it's going to be intriguing to see what happens. But I'd be surprised if they're able to win. Win enough the two that they need to get back the Bledisloe. But hey, who knows? And I think that's the great thing about sport is you don't know. You might expect what should happen, but it doesn't always go to script.
Oh, that's why you turn the telly on, mate. Let's almost wrap up, but most importantly, a question perhaps I should have asked at the start. You're a man for a number of reasons. You get some really good invites to golf games and tournaments. And I know you've been working on the game. I've been keeping an eye on some of the rounds on .golf, on the New Zealand Golf app. Like, how's things going? You hitting it well?
Wow. It couldn't have gone any worse. So I actually end up with a new set of clubs. So
okay.
So now I can't blame the tools. So it's down to the driver of them. But yeah, look, I've been lucky enough to sneak a few games in, and it's slowly improving. Like, anything can go horribly wrong still, but there's a little bit more consistency there. So that's what keeps you turning up, and is if you just get that slightly better. I'm probably not ready to come and say I'm going to have a chance of beating you, mate. But one day, you never know.
Yeah, right. We're just keeping an eye on that handicap. It's always you're always a
we don't want it to come
player.
down too.
No.
Don't want it to come down too quickly, because then you're not in the mix.
Yeah, absolutely. Mate, I'll let you go. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you jumping on the pod and reflecting a little bit on the Bledisloe Cup, particularly back in 2008, when a little bit of symmetry this year with Robbie Deans doing it back then, and now we've got Joe Schmidt, the third Kiwi, to take the reins of the Wallabies. So we're looking forward to those test matches in September. Thank you, buddy. Really appreciate it.
No problems. Pleasure.